Welcome back to Business Ethics. I'm Tom, and this video is discussing stakeholders and a stakeholder orientation. So to begin with, stakeholder is kind of a general term that many agencies use, government agencies, nonprofits, and business. It's kind of a catch-all term, and it just means anyone who has a stake in the outcome of the agency or business in question, right? So stakeholders can be customers, they can be employees, they can be the community, it can be special interest groups, so on and so forth. Stakeholders provide a good bit of context for what it looks like to run a business in some kind of ethical manner, right? And so, as we discussed before, business ethics is not so much concerned with how individuals kind of behave in a business setting, and it's more about what a business as a whole does in terms of to contribute to the good of society, and whether businesses should be concerned with the good of society as a whole, or whether they should be more focused on profit, right? And so the kind of catch-all term for a business that is concerned with the social good is what we would call socially responsible, right? Sometimes it's CSR, or corporate social responsibility, right? And what that typically is thought to look like is to have a concern for stakeholders and integrate that concern when it comes to the decisions that the business is making, right? So it is integrating concerns about the environment, it's integrating concerns about the community, it's integrating concerns about employees and consumers in a way that is supposed to kind of promote that social good, right? And kind of enhance or help everyone's kind of way of living in some way. Now, of course, if you have, that's more of a purpose first orientation. We've been referring to as a purpose first orientation, kind of viewing a business as primarily concerned with fulfilling some role in society. Now, alternatively, the profit first orientation still is concerned with stakeholders, but it prioritizes different stakeholders, right? Particularly, it prioritizes one stakeholder, which is investors, right? If you're focused on profits, then you want to make your investors happy, and you make decisions based on what makes your investors happy, right? And that is kind of the orientation of a profit first kind of view of business. They still consider stakeholders, but it's definitely different, and it's not oftentimes considered a stakeholder orientation to run your business like that. But those are kind of the juxtaposing positions, right? Now, that being said, stakeholders provide an important role, which is they provide a lot of constraint on a business, right? You can imagine a business that's making a ton of profits can still be quite constrained by things like public opinion, consumer behaviors, suppliers, government or political pressure, and these kinds of things. And all these entities are stakeholders, right? So definitely competitors, the government, suppliers, general public, special interest groups, all kinds of things, right? So, and then they also in the book, it's worth mentioning, they kind of differentiate between primary and primary and secondary stakeholders, or sometimes it's referred to as internal or external stakeholders, right? And so primary stakeholders or internal stakeholders will be the ones that are essential for day-to-day operations, employees, managers, executives, so on and so forth. And secondary stakeholders are ones that are a little bit more auxiliary. They might be suppliers depending on what goes on. It might be the government, depending on the industry you're in. It might be local communities or other kind of people who might be concerned about your business, but they're not really integral to your business, right? Now, in our reading, they mentioned three kinds of activities when it comes to stakeholders. And briefly, they are the collection and organization of data about stakeholders, right? The distribution of this data, and then the responsiveness to this data. What does this mean? Well, it's not enough to just identify relevant stakeholders. You also have to identify their relevant interests, right? Because you need to know what the stakeholders are concerned about if you want to meet those interests, right? If you have an interest in meeting, the stakeholders' needs, right? And so the first thing you need to do, and many companies do, is start to collect and organize data about stakeholder interests, right? And so sometimes this is just surveys. You pull up an app and it asks you, are you liking this app, right? This kind of stuff. Sometimes it's more targeted, calls and surveys. Sometimes it's like those mandatory surveys after you get customer service or whatnot. Sometimes it's someone who's kind of following social media trends about your company. Sometimes it's just looking at numbers in terms of sales and where the sales are happening and how frequently and all that kind of stuff, right? And then once you have that data, then you need to distribute it, meaning you need to let everyone in your company know what that data is, right? What are people buying? When are they buying it? What are people saying about customer service? This kind of stuff. You need to be aware of what different stakeholders think about your business activities, right? And everyone needs to kind of be on the same page about that. And that facilitates kind of the third step, which is the responsiveness to this, right? Integrating that information into how you make decisions and what you decide to do and whether or not you decide to expand and how and where and all those kinds of things, right? If you want to change things, which companies are changing all the time, right? They're changing to keep up with kind of the competition, but really, they are tuning into stakeholders, various stakeholders, and trying to make decisions to kind of anticipate the wants and needs of various people and avoiding pitfalls of, say, social or political blowback and these kinds of stuff, right? So now what I want to talk about a little bit, that's just a brief overview of stakeholders. The thing at the end of the reading, the stakeholder orientation, they give you 6 steps for this. The active reading assignment for this module has to do with that stakeholder orientation, and it's just trying to apply that stakeholder orientation to a particular situation. And the situation that I give is a situation in which you are a restaurant owner, right? And as it turns out, there is this kind of online swingers group, right, through some social media site. And swingers, so they sleep with people outside of their relationships, right? And some of these relationships are open relationships. Some of them are not, right? Some people are cheating. Some people are just polyamorous or what have you. But they've decided, for whatever reason, through circumstance, they've started to frequent your place and they've kind of made it a hangout, right? So people who are part of this online group start to come and dine. Now, you find out about this through a very conservative kind of local special interest group, and they don't like it, and they feel like you are harboring kind of these sinful activities and facilitating this lifestyle. As it turns out, you're just a restaurant owner. This has nothing to do with you, but they still don't like it, right? Now you're kind of stuck, right? The special interest group is likely to cause troubles for you if you do nothing. However, if you start refusing business to people based on their lifestyle outside of your restaurant, right? Then that could be problematic for you as well, right? And maybe you also have views about that. But and just to be clear, right, these are just they're swingers, but they just eat at your restaurant, right? They just hang out and talk and stuff like this. There's nothing, no funny business going on, right? They're paying customers, they're good customers, they're regulars, right? And so the question is, what do you do, right? And the way to kind of start to set this up in terms of making a decision is to use these 6 steps of a stakeholder orientation, right? The first one is to get clear about your mission statement. What is it that you intend to do, right? This gets you clear about what your values are. Then you need to kind of identify the relevant stakeholders, right? Who are the ones that you care about the most, and how much. Then you need to consider the particular interests of those stakeholders that are at issue here. And then you need to start to think about, you know, how you want to meet those interests. What's your decision going to be, right? And how much resources are you willing to um, um, use for this? What is kind of your tactic going to be? And then finally, you'll have to kind of think about how you're going to get feedback about this, right? Are you going to be just looking on social media? Are you going to use questionnaires? Are you going to be looking at the books? Are you going to have conversations with the special interest group? How are you going to kind of find out whether or not your decision is working? So that's kind of the trajectory to kind of use a systematic process to understand who the relevant stakeholders are, what their interests are, and how you're going to integrate that into your decision making, right? So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see each other soon.